Today's video is sponsored by Audible. Get a free audiobook and 2 Audible originals when you try Audible for 30 days. Visit audible.com/CodyBlue or text CodyBlue to 500-500 to get started. What's going on, Sony homies? It's your boy Cody Blue, and in today's video, we're gonna show you guys how I shoot photos with manual settings. So we'll walk you guys through all of my Sony specific settings, and then we'll kind of show you guys how I'm using aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to shoot landscapes and portraits and all the different photos that you guys see on my social media channels. And we're gonna do it all with the Sony a6000, since you guys are always pretty stoked about this camera. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome back to one of my favorite spots here in Lake Tahoe. You guys have definitely seen this spot in a couple of my videos, but we're back, and today we're talking about manual settings for photography. Now, you guys are sending me messages all the time on Instagram asking me what are the best settings for photography, or what mode should I shoot in, or what shutter speed should I use? And the truth is, the perfect settings don't really exist. Literally every single photo that you guys see me post on Instagram or here on my YouTube channel are all shot with different settings, because it really depends on your light and your mood and your scene and a whole bunch of different factors. So even if I was to tell you the exact settings that I use on a photo, chances are those settings aren't going to work for your photo. But I think you can learn a lot just by watching somebody take photos and kind of explain the settings that I'm using and why I'm using them. So in today's video, we're just gonna cruise around, shoot some photos, and I'll tell you guys the settings that I'm using, why I'm using them, and hopefully it'll help you guys out with shooting photos on your camera. So let's get into it. So first off, let's talk about some of the camera settings that you guys are gonna want to set that will probably never really change on your camera. It doesn't matter if you're shooting on an a6000 or a7 III or a Canon or a Nikon, these settings will pretty much always stay the same. So number one, I always shoot my photos in RAW. Now, if you don't know what RAW is, it's basically just a file format that has a lot more information. That way, when you edit your photos, you get more dynamic range and better colors and different things like that. Number two is I always shoot with my picture profiles turned off and my creative style set to standard. Now, truthfully, these settings don't really matter, but it makes your photos look a little bit better on the screen, which I think helps when you're actually shooting your pictures. So if you're shooting RAW, these settings don't really matter, but picture profile off and creative style standard. Now, I also shoot in 3:2 and not 16:9, because if I want 16:9, I can just crop it later to 16:9. So shoot in 3:2 and crop later if you want to. Now, lastly, as far as focus mode goes, I'm always shooting with a single point or the expand flexible spot, which basically means I'm always choosing a specific focus point for every single one of my photos. Okay, cool. So now you've got your camera all set up and you're ready to go. The last thing to do is to turn your dial to that M mode and start shooting. By the way, if you're wondering when my lighting has changed and looks a little bit different, that's because today is actually a new day. Yesterday was getting a little bit too windy. So, you know, movie magic and all that. So when it comes to shooting photos, especially in manual mode, there's a couple of different rules that I like to follow to make sure that I get a good image. Number one is good exposure over everything. No matter what settings you're shooting with, no matter what scene you're shooting in, the number one priority is to always get a good exposure, because if you don't have a good exposure, then your photo is totally ruined anyways, and nothing else really matters. So despite all of these rules, even if you have to break some of these rules, the most important thing is to get a good exposure. Number two is try to keep your shutter speed above 1/200. Now, because we're shooting handheld, and I pretty much always shoot handheld, we want to make sure we're shooting with a fast enough shutter speed so that we don't capture any motion blur in our images. So there is a little bit of wiggle room as far as the shutter speed goes, but just to keep things simple for you guys, keep it above 1/200 and you should be good. And rule number three, try to keep your ISO as low as possible. Now, I try to always shoot with an ISO that's lower than ISO 800. That way I get a nice clean image without any grain or any noise. But remember, sometimes you may not be able to shoot below ISO 800. So when in doubt, refer back to rule number one.
All right,
right, so now let's walk you guys through my process of shooting a landscape photo. As you can see, I have a pretty beautiful landscape behind me. Obviously, the lighting is not ideal. Typically, we want to shoot at sunrise or sunset, but this is what we're working with today. We've got a beautiful dock here. We've got the mountains and the lake and some trees over here and just a really good looking scene. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go across over here and kind of stand on this rock. That way I can shoot the dock and the lake and the mountains and everything else. So I'll try to walk you guys through my whole process and tell you what settings I'm using and why I'm using them. Now, the first thing that I always do whenever I take any photo is I start by thinking about what aperture do I want to shoot that photo at. Now for landscapes, I typically want to shoot at those larger aperture numbers like f8 all the way up to f16 because I want to make sure that I can get everything in focus. But ultimately, that decision is going to be up to you. If you want to shoot a landscape and you want a blurry foreground, then you can definitely shoot a landscape at f2.8. There's no real hard and fast rules about what aperture you have to shoot at. But for this particular photo, I think an aperture of about f8 is going to be nice. So we'll go ahead and set our aperture to f8. And then we'll move on to the other settings. So next we want to start thinking about our shutter speed and our ISO while remembering the rules that we talked about earlier. So we want to make sure our shutter speed is more than 1/200, but we also want to make sure our ISO is as low as possible. So since it's nice and bright outside today, the chances are we're probably going to be able to shoot this photo at ISO 100. So let's go ahead and set our camera to ISO 100. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through the viewfinder and adjust my shutter speed until I have a good exposure. So looking through here, I can see that about 1/400 is going to give me a good exposure, and that's faster than 1/200, which means I won't get any motion blur in my shot. So we'll focus on the mountains in the background and we'll take that photo. I used to think there's nothing better than reading a good book out in the wilderness, until I started using Audible. Audible allows me to carry an unmatched selection of books with me everywhere I go. Whether I'm on the trail, at the lake, or camping in desolation, it's the perfect way to enjoy a book without missing the scenery. And now with Audible Originals, you can enjoy exclusive titles written by celebrated storytellers that you can't find anywhere else. But let's be honest, you're here to learn about photography, which is why I think you should check out Photography Exposure by James Karen. In this book, you'll find all the details about camera settings and exposure that we didn't cover in today's video. And you can get it for free. Get your first audiobook and 2 Audible Originals for free when you try Audible for 30 days. Visit audible.com/CodyBlue or text CodyBlue to 500-500 to get started. All right, so I know what you guys are thinking, like, yeah, that's all good. You know, you just pick an aperture and then you kind of pick a low ISO and somehow you magically pick the right shutter speed. But how do you know what a proper exposure looks like? So for me, I've been shooting photos a little while, and at this point, I'm kind of just used to it. I basically just look through the viewfinder and adjust my shutter speed until the image looks good. Now, this is the nice thing about Sony cameras, is what you see inside the viewfinder is what you actually get. Whereas on like Canon cameras and Nikon cameras, you actually have to take the photo and then look at the screen and make sure the exposure looks good. But what about you beginners out there who don't really know the difference between a good exposure and a bad exposure? Well, you're in luck. Your camera actually has a little exposure cheat sheet that you can use. If you look inside the viewfinder, you'll see a row of numbers at the bottom. I think it goes from -5 to +5. And above those numbers, you'll see a little arrow. Now you'll notice when you change your shutter speed, that arrow actually moves from left to right. So the goal is to have that arrow directly above the 0, and then you'll have a good exposure. But keep in mind, this isn't always totally accurate. It depends on your lighting and your scene. Sometimes your camera will think something is a good exposure when really you're actually underexposed or overexposed. So use your eyeballs, but also use the meter to make sure you're getting a good exposure. And the last thing that I want to talk about today is portraits and shooting portraits in manual mode. Now, For all intents and purposes, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. You choose your aperture, then you adjust your ISO and shutter speed, making sure your shutter speed is fast enough and your ISO is low enough. Really, the only difference between landscapes and portraits is that a lot of times with portraits, you're gonna shoot on a longer lens, you're gonna zoom in a little bit more, but you're also going to shoot at a lower aperture number. So most people are shooting portraits anywhere from like f1.4 all the way up to like f2.8, maybe f4. But typically those lower aperture numbers are what you're gonna wanna use because that gives you that nice blurry background that we like to see on headshots and portraits and different things like that. But otherwise, same exact thing. So you would just pick your aperture, let's say f2.8, pick your ISO 100, and then adjust your shutter speed so that you have a good exposure, remembering that you can use the little meter inside your viewfinder to make sure that your exposure looks good. So I'm out here by myself today. I can't really show you guys any examples of portraits that I've taken today, but let's show you guys some examples of portraits that I've taken in the past, and I'll put the camera settings on there so that you guys know how I'm shooting them. So there you go, guys. That's a little rundown of my process for how I shoot pretty much every single one of my photos. Now, of course, there are tons of more advanced techniques that we could talk about when it comes to shooting photos in bad lighting or shooting photos of high action or maybe long exposures. There are so many different techniques that you can do when you're shooting photos with manual settings. And unfortunately, I just don't have enough time to talk about all of them in one single video. So if you have any topics or techniques that you guys want to hear about related to photography, let me know down in the comments below and I'll try to make some more videos about it for you guys. But otherwise, that's all I had for you today. So do me a favor, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and if you have questions, send them to me on Instagram. But until next time, we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out. I'm gonna hang out and just kind of enjoy this lake to myself here. So we'll see ya.